So, time loops were a real thing for games in 2021. Anomalies of conventional physics with protagonists trapped in an enclosed temporal circuit. They repeat the same stretch of time over and over again until something they do or someone they meet sets them free. The time loop mechanics rarely change from TV to movies to video games, but the narrative design remains compelling, because so few other story structures are as good at getting across the feeling of existential stagnation. Intense emotions and major life-changing events can be paralyzing. Traumas or frustrated expectations can trap us in states of guilt, fear, or self-loathing, reactions that worsen as they thwart our attempts to process them. The feedback loops behind our negative emotions aren't always easy to understand while we're feeling them. It's hard to see the shortcomings of our own mind when its distortions govern our waking experience. Science fiction takes these psychological systems and makes them easier to observe. The cycles stop being conceptual or neurochemical. They become an observable part of the fiction. The self-sabotaging effect of distress manifests in the real world, turning the mental confines into a prison more physical. This is where we find Returnal's protagonist, Selene, an astronaut stuck in a time loop on the planet Atropos. As she searches the planet for the source of a mysterious broadcast, she finds the corpses of her former self, mounting evidence of all her failed escape attempts. With her ship Helios destroyed and no way to contact Earth, she must journey through the planet's hostile and ever-changing landscape to find the signal and return home. Along her perilous journey, Selene's fractured and disorganized past begins shoving its way into the present, scraping at the forefront of her mind. Disturbing memories bubble up from beneath her subconscious. An uncanny 20th century house, a car crash, and an astronaut stalking her and her son, Helios. It's clear from early in the game that Returnal operates on an emotional logic, more abstract and personal than the explicit physics of space travel and time anomalies. The alien planet uses Selene as a vector for its instability. Its hazards play off her insecurities, her tightly wound personality, and the secret past it shouldn't know about. This explains why her adventures are refracted through the prism of Greek mythology.
The variety of dangerous fauna on this world is beyond anything I've previously experienced. I hate to use the term, but it feels mythic.
The planet is named Atropos, after one of the Greek moirai, or fates. This name means inflexible and unchangeable. Atropos determines that the will of the fates is inevitable. As such, the planet intends to force Selene into a revelation she can't avoid, and failing that, imprison her for eternity. Selene herself shares a name with the Greek goddess of the moon, while her son was named after the sun god, Helios. Selene's mythic fixations work in tandem with the time loop to texture her as a person, hinting at the deeper insights to be gleaned from her journey. Who she is, what she believes, and how she faces her problems can be pieced together by examining how the player interacts with her. The cycle of death and rebirth on Atropos is played out longer than Selene can imagine, but change isn't impossible. The player takes control of Selene at a watershed moment in her self-awareness. She's more capable of recognizing the cycle that's played out in all her past lives. With this clarity, she's poised to finally work toward a permanent solution. That's where the player comes in. They help Selene explore the Atropan landscape so she might get her bearings in a world hell-bent on ensnaring her. If she can survive for long enough, then she might find meaning in the scattered shards of her past. As Selene and the player scour the planet's 6 biomes, they steadily learn how to make the next cycle a little more manageable. This holds true even with randomized levels. You may not get to memorize the secrets and hazards, but with practice comes a deeper understanding of how this planet constructs its obstacles. You learn what to look for, see which risks are worth taking, and anticipate the dangers that come next. Intuition and adaptability matter more than some absolute knowledge of the planet. But I'd be lying if I said the player didn't also take bad things from cycle to cycle. The pain of losing after making so much progress, the fear of confronting seemingly unwinnable odds, and the steady mental decline that comes from breaking yourself against immovable obstacles. There are some deeply frustrating encounters that might leave you beaten and disempowered, Not many AAA games are this committed to cultivating such unforgiving white-knuckle intensity. Returnal hurts. Losses take away all your progress, and until a recent update, you couldn't even leave the game mid-cycle. You put your PS5 in rest mode and hoped a crash, power outage, auto-update, or roommate didn't erase all your progress. Even with that fixed, players are still left constantly questioning their readiness to move on. How many of the main and side paths has Selene explored? Is she strong enough to defeat the boss or survive the next biome? Should she stop by a challenge room for a chance to get stronger? Make a wrong choice, and she'll be some Atropos monster's dinner. To survive, Selene starts each cycle with her sidearm SD-M8, a basic mid-range firearm. The rest of her arsenal caters to the player's individual preferences, whether they favor high damage at close range, patient precision, or breathing room in the chaos. Through proficiency and practice, Selene can find increasingly powerful guns that evolve with each use. The boosted arsenal helps her find consumables for temporary advantages and artifacts that grant valuable abilities. A consumable could be anything from a suit repair vial to this absolutely sick prototype-style ground spike. While an artifact may power up the melee attack, create opportunities to repair suit integrity, or even save Selene from death. Only good pickups might be expensive or hard to find, leaving players with the riskier options. Malignant items provide vital aid at the risk of malfunctions, a stat impairment fixed by completing a challenge, such as killing hostiles or collecting obolites, the game's main currency. Parasites are most emblematic of this risk-reward paradigm. They have great benefit and great drawbacks that make players weigh the pros and cons against their playstyle. This is Returnal's real challenge, not in perfect accuracy, cat-like reflexes, or a preternatural awareness. It wants you making risk assessments, always thinking about when to test your skills and when to play it safe. Every impulse tells you to avenge that past incarnation of yourself because you need the ether to cleanse malignant items or power up the reconstructor. But you might not be strong enough to fight whatever appears. Same goes for any side path, challenge room, or secret area. It's easy to get killed early on if you're looking for fast rewards too quickly. Patience and careful attention to your limits are an essential part of the strategy. Even if you can't get the artifact that grants a 35% chance for killed enemies to explode, cautious gameplay will reward you most in the long run. These variables and decisions build mortifying tension across each cycle. Any new run represents time, energy, and emotional investment, and every loss feels like a wound. Therefore, patience is everything. Because Selene can backtrack at all times, she's never beholden to rash decision-making. She can save healing beds for later, pool obolites for better upgrades, and put off big challenges until she's stronger or carrying a weapon that reflects what the player prefers. Flexibility and adaptability go a long way in Returnal. One parasite effect I can always tolerate is when obolites disappear from fallen enemies more quickly. Rushing to collect the game's main currency is nice practice for the aggressive approach that Returnal most often rewards. The game makes it really hard to stay in one place for long. It's not impossible, but it's not a good habit to develop either. Smaller threats can easily flank you with damage that adds up fast. Some creatures even have attacks that move through solid objects, and the more dangerous enemies will close in on you before you can say, "Holy crap, where did all my health go?" The good news is that once you're ready to move on, the game has you covered, literally. Much of Atropos is densely packed with underground tunnels, massive obstructions, and surprising verticality. The rooms permit wild sprinting, and I rarely found myself getting cornered at dead ends. It's this reliable freedom of movement that can quickly turn deadly encounters in your favor. Speedy evasion is then made easier with some important tools Selene finds later in her mission. Returnal's gameplay melds into an odyssey of breathless action, careful decision-making, and gripping brushes with death. It wants you to face every new terror with courage, knowing the risk but persisting through the fear. It's telling that the first boss is named Frike, after the Greek spirit of fear, whose name literally means trembling. That's probably what a lot of new players did when they first fought her. Returnal's entire mechanical experience, the relentless opposition, the unending deliberation, and the creeping fear of failure, cleverly parallels Selene's inner turmoil. Not just the confusion of landing on an alien planet, but why it antagonizes her so intimately. From here on, analyzing the story means fully spoiling it. If you haven't snagged a PS5 and want to be surprised by how deep Returnal goes, maybe watch another one of my videos. Here's one about Spiritfarer. Or who knows, maybe a few spoilers will convince you that this game is worth your time.
This was taken after I left. Why?
So, it's pretty heavily implied early on that Selene's son Helios has died. Yeah, I wasn't joking about the spoiler warning. This is your last chance. Back out now if that last detail surprised you. Every time she leaves the crash site and begins a new cycle, her suit displays a warning that reads, Helios abandoned. An oddly sentimental message, were it not for the fact that she also refers to her ship with he/him pronouns, as though her spaceship was like a companion. Thoughts of Helios appear as intrusive nighttime visions of a lonely house, bereft of sunlight in more ways than one. Hints of Helios are blotted in shadow or submerged in the threatening aura. His place in her memory is distant and out of reach, a disorganized jumble of images and feelings that she attempts to unravel with each push through Atropos, a planet named for the inevitability of both its entrapment and its big revelation. But Selene, possessing a principled and inquisitive mind, resolves not to be shaken by her emotions. Instead, she wants to cut through the planet, figuring out what past iterations of herself could not, in spite of the disjointed sentimentality haunting her every step.
But do you see the white shadow? This phrase is calling me. It's reached the point that I can't hear anything else.
As Selene scours the biomes, we catch glimpses of the qualities and events that define her, fragmentary hints at how her personality drove her to this prison. It begins with a harsh message in Helios' inbox, admonishing her for this rogue expedition. A rejection letter we find in the 20th century house suggests she was not fit for space travel, owing to a debilitating injury, degenerative disorder, psychiatric instability, or other medical condition that requires a mountain of prescriptions. Judging by her rash actions and big dreams, she clearly finds the slow, earthbound life unacceptable.
The idea of waking up to routine, gym, coffee, books, interacting with people, it sounds so alien now.
All this information builds a picture of a highly motivated but pathologically driven woman. She's intelligent and strong. Just look at her sprint, Jesus! But those admirable qualities were most likely cultivated through shame and a pattern of withholding desires. She puts her emotions second, to the point of tunnel vision, focusing instead on her path to space. It's plain to see this determination manifest in a distance from her son. Whether it's the lonely nighttime strolls through her house or the incomplete memories of Helios, Selene's astral ambitions have consumed her. Yet while she's trapped on Atropos, that ambition leads her to explore the planet's previous inhabitants. The sentients built a civilization that, over time, went to ruin. They evolved through a collective neural nexus Selene referred to as a hive mind. This cognitive construct gave their people a unity, an aggregate investment in the growth and prosperity of their cities. Until one day, something ripped hundreds of sentients from their place in the collective. These mental stragglers became known as the Severed. It's interesting to note how the hostility of the severed comes from their pain. Robbed of a place among their kin, these lonely, directionless creatures seek meaning in the meaningless. They tether themselves to seemingly unimportant obelisks, forming a grim parody of the oneness they used to feel with the sentients. Even when the severed attack Selene, we see them attempting to bond with her, a ribbon of red energy merging their consciousness with hers. This aggression takes on a tragic quality, wanting real connection but only capable of expressing rage and hate. However, Selene is dismissive of the severed. She reads their base reactions and violent anger as the result of diminished cerebral capability. Like the sentients, she prefers to suppress those emotional and chaotic forces. The answer she wants lies in a rationality she can discover. Perhaps the xenoglyphs erected across the land might hold an answer she needs, so long as she can parse their meaning from the ciphers scattered along her path. It does not register to her as unusual that the automatons built to defend the sentients cannot distinguish between her and the severed. This quest to understand Atropos implicitly and explicitly alludes to the myth of Prometheus, and not just the boot upgrade that lets her walk on hazardous surfaces.
Accursed fate. While Atlas bore and Prometheus endured, Selene hollowed.
Her ravenous pursuit of answers is reminiscent of the Greek titan Prometheus, who stole fire from Zeus and delivered it to mankind. Fire, of course, functioning as a metaphor for ingenuity and great feats of human consciousness. She, like the titan before her, is looking for knowledge. Fulfilling her scientific ambitions might bring her comfort. Knowing her emotional and circumstantial distress can be solved with intellect. Despite what happened to Prometheus, Selene conquered the winged beast on the mountain, named Ixion after a wicked king Zeus punished by tying to a flaming wheel in the image of the sun. In a way, Selene knows what that's like, as being bound to her departed son was its own form of torture. The burning pain got so bad that, if she were to survive, she needed that fire to fuel her determination. Curiosity helped her sublimate that grief into grit. In her mind, finishing her study of space might provide vindication. If she can push through the hurt and prove stronger than Atropos, then maybe the tragedy she felt along the way will have been worth it. She'd be doing it for him.
What is the truth behind White Shadow? Why do you repeat my buried past? How can you know? Out here in the void.
The last enemy she faces before her escape is named Nemesis, after the Greek goddess of retribution. The word retribution was once literally defined as a recompense for service or merit, a receipt equal to that of one's accomplishments. This is the retribution Selene hoped for, that her intellectual ambitions would be rewarded with the right to finally sit, an end to the running and the danger. Of course, the gods know retribution by her swift and brutal punishment. She tears down the hubristic and those who defy the inevitable. Selene, for all her stellar accomplishments, will not be spared her Promethean fate. Against overwhelming odds, she reached contact with Astra. They rescued Selene, who returned to Earth as a hero. She peacefully grew to old age, content in the knowledge that her dream was fulfilled. She died years later, presumably of natural causes, buried before a small gathering. And as the last shovelful of dirt covered her coffin, Selene woke to a familiar rush. The same traumatic burst of violence she always felt when crash landing on Atropos, the planet having honored its namesake.
No, I can't be here. I escaped. I was... Helios, you're still here too.
This twist comes like a razor to the liver. Selene spent decades believing she was finally free, while her astral prison merely bided its time. The gravity of her imprisonment breaks her resilience. Knowledge and perseverance were not enough to break the cycle. These new versions of Selene grow increasingly panicked, And the recordings become less about cataloging the Atropan ecosystem and more about preserving her dwindling composure. She even scolds herself for struggling to maintain her sanity.
The music is calling me now. How do I stop this? I don't want to become that woman who speaks madness with my voice.
The inescapable fact of Helios's death wore down her studious personality, bringing her raw emotional self to the top. Her cold, empirical dictation was replaced with a fearful, reverent soliloquy, a scientific mind now shaking at her existential dread. Whereas Selene once felt akin to the sentients, disciplined people who built automatons to protect their ascension to Olympus, she now recognizes herself among the severed in Tartarus, confronting the failure of her own defense mechanisms. Bereft of her once comforting purpose, the White Shadow ceases to call, for even her demons have abandoned her. Instead, the Song of Hyperion sings from his organ across the once familiar forest biome. In Greek myth, Hyperion is the Titan child of Gaia and Uranus, and the father of Selene. The astronaut Selene's confrontation with this titanic musician harkens back to her strained relationship with her mother, Theia, named for the Titan who birthed the moon goddess. Much of Selene's drive to explore space comes from her mother, but it's a fixation born of fear. Though no explicit abuse is depicted, her mother's injuries and stifled ambitions clearly became the whip at Selene's back.
It reminds me of the old photos my mother showed me. The type of suit she would have worn if not for the accident.
Hyperion's funereal rendition of Blue Oyster Cult's Don't Fear the Reaper reverberates across Selene's consciousness until she can kill the beast and cease its infernal music. It's a melancholic conclusion to a bond characterized by resentment and frigidity, a bitter goodbye to the mother who scorned her, and a severed connection from the father she never really knew. But as Selene dives deeper into the bowels of Atropos, she slowly reaches the source of her misery.
This isn't... No, it is. The same coordinates as the desert. I recognize the mountaintop, but...
The house no longer shows her perspective alone, but her son's too. The little boy Helios, making stories and meaning from the toys scattered about his room, terrified by the prospect of wandering his own home. This house was not welcoming. It's a frigid husk, containing a bitter legacy of thwarted ambition and unspoken pain. Selene knows this to be true, because she experienced it herself. The fallout of parental abuse seeps from every wall, hanging in the air like a miasma. She rehearses these painful visions on Atropos, ruminating on the pain Helios must have felt in her absence. She thought about the tears in her voice as she told Helios that her work confined her, how hopeless he must have felt while his mother was chasing a hollow dream.
I'm not coming home. But I left your favorite dinner lying at the bottom of the refrigerator, okay? If you heat it up for 8 minutes and 36 seconds, everything will be just fine. Just fine, just fine. See you soon.
As Selene's unconscious rose to the surface, frustrating the integrity of her conscious mind, it became increasingly clear that the sentients and the severed, like the rest of the planet, acted out Selene's psychological turmoil. The sentients, whose industriousness and intelligence Selene admired, tried harder and harder to wall themselves off from the violent and irrational severed. The severed were frightened and desperate to connect with their people, to share in the joy of forming a bond again. Yet in their unwilling separation from the hive mind, they lost the ability to communicate those needs. All they can do now is act on their instability. Just as the sentients failed to defend themselves from the severed, so too did Selene's dispassionate intellect crumble beneath the emotions she couldn't suppress. The scientific pursuits that focused her mind and gave her purpose couldn't actually settle the storm in her heart. The grief she tried to banish poured out of her in ways she couldn't control. It made her job harder, fractured her relationships, and reopened old traumatic wounds. So when the chance to go to space was taken away from her, when the war between her conscious desires and her unconscious needs reached its tipping point, she lost all hope, along with any ability to show how miserable she became. She could only freeze over, a cold dread whose stillness revealed the true depths of her misery.
The Tempest of the Deep.
The last enemy she faces is a beast named Ophion, after an ancient titan who created the Earth. There's little consistent record of who the Titans were, as they had few worshippers among the Greeks, but Ophion is often understood to be a primordial serpent. He was cast into Tartarus by Cronus. In this abyss, the deepest part of the planet and the most repressed part of Selene's psyche, she witnesses the creation of her torment and the source of her Atropos bondage. Selene didn't just lose Helios. She failed to save him from the car crash that claimed his life. Upon confronting this truth, the disparate motifs and feelings start to coalesce. The abuse she endured from her mother created the spacefaring ambitions that consumed her mind, severing Selene from her emotional bonds and priming her for the accident that claimed her body. Space became this singularity of caustic motivation, a black ichor that filled her heart and coursed through her veins. The astronaut that had been following her from the start was a manifestation of this abusive expectation. While the white shadow offered her a temporary relief from pain, it also demanded that she numb her true feelings and trap herself in a malignant obsession. It grew so cruel that when it could not conquer Selene, it went for her son instead.
It's Atropos.
Now she can see what these expectations have cost her, how the dreams of space and the approval she never received turned nightmarish in the cold void. She joins the canon of tragic Greek figures, whose flaws, aspirations, and hubris relegated them to eternal damnation. For all that effort to be in vain, for all her sacrifices to be the very thing that dashed her dreams of becoming an astronaut, she's left with nothing but the prison in her mind. She's doomed to wander an infinite expanse, lost, alone, and never to return. This is the legacy she has inherited from those who came before her: Prometheus, Sisyphus, Ixion, Thea, Selene.
But what if I find nothing waiting there? What if the pit continues downwards, never ending, and what remains is a return to Helios? Another end, another beginning, and my home in the cycle.
So, what does she do now? She's had this tremendous revelation and a climactic battle with the final boss. Is this the end? Well, not really. There's more story content, unlocked once the player collects 6 sun fragments. The full piece offers Selene a final vision of the incident. The cutscene visually confirms a lot of what has been implied throughout the game. Gradually losing her son to her toxic ambitions created a specter of shame that slowly revealed itself across the 3 acts of her story. This structure strongly resembles the 3 domains of helping skills as conceptualized by Dr. Clara Hill, a psychologist at the University of Maryland. These domains include exploration, insight, and action. Act 1 maps well onto exploration, a stage that promotes discovery and awareness. Selene learns how Atropos changes in response to her actions, what kinds of dangers she can expect, and how she might be able to escape. Just as exploration led to the depths of Atropos, so too did it lead her to the uncomfortable corners of her mind. The more difficult examinations came in Act 2, the stage that best resembles insight, when clients seek a causal explanation for their suffering. Selene is no longer interested in discovering new things about Atropos, nor is she actively trying to escape.
Glaciers in my mind laid into a desert of severed thoughts. I follow their footsteps back to the wheelchair. Once I climb the mountaintop hoping to ascend, soon I will sink in dark waters, transcending as all light is smothered.
Her scientific inquiry turned spiritual, as the how of her predicament changed into a why. Why can't she leave? And what is the planet trying to tell her? So when she finally gets the answer she needed, she begins the last act of the game with the final domain of helping skills: action. Within this framework, I appreciate how the path to the true ending is a collectathon that makes players grind through the whole game a second time, because the action stage might be the least fun part of therapy. Oh yeah, the imagery is so abstract that the entire game could be a figment of Selene's imagination. The kind of visual metaphor an overly positivistic mind creates when forced to think about something as immaterial as emotions. She's trying to explain the traumatic compulsion that destroyed her family, and the therapist is sitting across from her like, wait, what's a spit mob blaster?
Everyone is overbearing and controlling, and I haven't even told a single person about... If they found out I was here, that we were talking...
At the action stage, there aren't as many grand discoveries or cathartic epiphanies as there are in the first two stages. Action is about the daily commitment to improving yourself, and like every other form of hygiene, it's mundane and repetitive. But it's through dutiful repetition that healing becomes a habit. With a new goal in mind, Selene approaches her confinement on Atropos with renewed enthusiasm. Getting through the planet is still a challenge. None of the monsters stop kicking her ass just because she had a psychological awakening. Instead, the environment becomes less hazardous. Water no longer killed her in an instant. Pools of caustic fluid no longer dealt damage, and the data cubes helped unlock new items. Each run, every new attempt, gets a little more manageable. She's more knowledgeable and prepared than ever before, more ready to understand how her past led to this moment. We see this when Selene finally confronts her mother, the deathly visage rising from the wheelchair to assault her. Only now, Selene sees this creature for the sad, wounded beast it is.
I told you to leave me alone.
Having grown since landing on Atropos, Selene no longer owes fealty to the woman who caused her pain, nor does she fear her own place in the wheelchair. The loss of her physical ability means she's free to live on her own terms, no longer chasing the dream that cost her her life 100 times over.
Why did you seem so frightening when you were so much less?
Even if she can't bring Helios back, she can honor his memory by giving up the life that ended his. She's still the same resourceful and intelligent woman she always was, free to do whatever she's capable of without her mother's all-consuming imposition. Seeing this healing play out again might have lost some of its novelty, but it's the peaceful conclusion Selene deserved. As challenging as it was to get there, the satisfaction of watching her get better was ultimately worth pursuing.